We're going to be talking about things like an entire hive world's population that suddenly and mysteriously vanished overnight, and left behind some incredibly bizarre and unexplainable evidence to what had happened.
Number 3. The disappearance of Fornax Aleph. Fornax Aleph was the site of one of the most unnerving and inexplicable episodes within the Sabbat World's crusade. The Hive World had been determined to be an enemy bastion, one that had a significant fleet reserve and would put up an enormous fight. 9 regiments of the Imperial Guard were set to invade the planet, and it was planned that they would be reinforced by the Iron Snake Space Marine chapter. However, the assault ended up getting delayed twice because of aggressive warp storm activity in the area. These warp storms were so bad that the Iron Snake's battle barges were forced into a 4-month holding pattern. General Aleph, serving under War Master Slato, was set to command the Imperial Guard units, but his fleets ended up getting scattered by the warp storms, and when he arrived at the planet, he did so with only a third of his complement. To make matters worse, there was no sign of the Iron Snakes that were supposed to be there to support them. Now, Aleph was a very cautious man and decided to abort the assault run. The forces he had under his control were certainly nothing to scoff at, but they wouldn't be enough to take an entire hive world single-handedly. He moved his fleets to the outer system and decided to hold there until reinforcements arrived. That being said, he didn't want to waste this opportunity, so he directed a rapid pursuit frigate, the Ziegler, to undertake an intruder pass through the inner system. This would be done to assess the enemy strengths and disposition. However, to the general's complete bafflement, the Ziegler encountered 0 resistance, and no orbital batteries fired on it, and no ships were launched to engage. The Ziegler even reported that all of the orbital yards were entirely empty of ships, both military and civilian. Most peculiar of all, they detected no electromagnetic activity anywhere on the planet. No Vox substrate, no power industry, no motion of any kind. The great hives of Fornax Aleph appeared to be empty and dead. General Aleph believed that maybe the population had retreated to the countryside, so over the next several weeks he would deploy many more cruisers to scout out different parts of the planet. All of them, however, came up empty. There was no life that could be detected anywhere on the planet. Aleph decided to launch a spearhead force instead of waiting for reinforcements, deploying 2 full regiments of heavy infantry, the 34th and 52nd Fighting Felids. He would also deploy the Vitrian 10th Armored Brigade, which totaled to about 16,000 men and women and 800 fighting vehicles. Much like what happened with the rapid pursuit frigates, they met no resistance. The world was entirely devoid of life. It was as if the vast population had suddenly vanished in an instant. There were half-eaten meals on hab tables, unfinished games of regicide in the street parlors. There wasn't even power, but that was admittedly easily restored, showing no indication of sabotage. If the planet had been evacuated, there would surely be unmistakable evidence of this, and if a great plague had taken the population, there would be bodies everywhere. There were, however, no corpses to be found, no burial pits or any sign of struggle or disaster. The entire population had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind an eerie, vacant world. Unfortunately, the only thing we really have to go on is the transcribed reports that Aleph gave back to War Master Slato. And those reports indicate that him and the men under his control were incredibly unnerved. Despite the uneasiness they felt, they ended up fortifying their position to wait for reinforcements. The men were getting more and more nervous each and every day, and during the night, they would report the sound of bone-chilling screams of anguish echoing throughout the hive. Despite search efforts, the source of the screaming was never located. On the first day of 758 M41, all transmissions from Elbith's Liberation Force abruptly ceased. It would be 80 more days after this when the Iron Snakes, who had been delayed by the warp storms, would finally arrive as reinforcements. 300 of them immediately made planetfall and made their way to Elbeth's last recorded position. It was said that the Iron Snakes were a very serious chapter that were not easily disturbed, but their initial contact back to the War Master Slato lacked their characteristic demeanor. They seemed to be at a loss for words, their report only saying that there was no one here. There was no evidence that Aleph and his forces had ever been there. If they had fortified a position, it could not be located. Whatever happened to the planet's population had claimed Aleph and the men and women under his command as well. The Iron Snakes would spend the next month scouring every single inch of the world for clues to what had happened. For the most part, their search came up disappointingly empty, with one exception. Impossibly, a single Lehman Russ battle tank was discovered 80 stories up on the roof of a hab stack. All of the Vox headsets inside were missing, except for the last 30 centimeters of their cords that had been plugged into the outlets. The cords themselves had been severed and somehow fused at a molecular level. The only human remains that were discovered was a single gauntlet, in which a calcified human hand was found still gripping the gearbox lever within the tank. No formal explanation of what happened on this world was ever established, and years later, the planet would be repopulated. Now, thankfully, since then, there have been no mysterious mass disappearances or anything like that. But to this day, the population has continued to report unexplained screams in the dead of night.